And guiding us through this insightful conversation, we have Nitin Jaiswal from Bloomberg, who will play the role of moderator for this session. I'll hand the session over to Nitin to take charge of this conversation.
Yeah, okay, so the first session after lunch, I think we had a great start to the morning, which I'll come back to that later. But let me set the context before I get my speakers into the conversation. Okay, in my role, I host a lot of roundtables and panels. And one of the most disappointing factor for me when I do that is very rarely there are follow-ups when we do those kind of roundtables. And there was one exception when I hosted one of such roundtable, and that was with Mr. Rafizi in Singapore, with help of Amex over there. And we had 18 people in the room, and it was one of the most intense conversation and discussion we had, how to take Malaysia forward from the tech and startup perspective. And I never expected that, what is going to happen after that. We heard the minister's vision, but I have to say that Minister, his team, James and Ben, has been chasing, and every stakeholder out there has been following up every issue which was raised. And that was very refreshing for me to see that kind of follow-up after a session. And that was the time I was actually convinced, yes, this is the time Malaysia is actually ready for business, for startups to come in. And what happened over there, and today we are sitting here for the launch of KL20. Minister, I have to compliment you and congratulate you for a great start to this event, but we also know that this is just start to the process. Malaysia is open to the business, but we have to go a long way before we achieve the goal of KL20. So what this story looks like and where we are now is going to be part of the discussion we have. So I have four esteemed speakers over there. The interesting thing is that, when the people who have money, they know what they think has a big impact on the place where they do business, because they do a lot of due diligence before they actually write the check. If they are not comfortable because of certain things, that means things are not moving. So that's why it's very important for us to know, not only from the policymaker, but also from the people who actually own money, what they see the Malaysia story and what needs to be done. So let me start with Minister. I just want to do a bit different with you. You have been speaking as a minister for quite some time as to why people should be excited about Malaysia as a startup, or why it's open for the business. Let's say that if you were you also were the startup entrepreneur at one time. And if you have to wear that hat as a startup entrepreneur at this point of time, and you also know that Indonesia, Malaysia has produced more unicorns than Malaysia, what has changed at this time that you would be very excited as a startup entrepreneur that this is the place I want to be, and this is the place where the next generation of unicorns are going to come?
Thank you very much, Nitin. If I have the opportunity to relive the life of a startup founder again, having gone through it the first time, I wouldn't do it. Because it's actually very difficult, I remember I've started my career of course, in audit, and then in oil and gas, in pharmaceutical, managing usually billions of investments and projects. So after I, quit politics in 2018, so I thought that how difficult it is to run a startup. Everyone was talking about startup, and I happened to do electronics engineering in uni, which I hated then, because I hated all this programming and coding. So I thought, how difficult it would have been. If you were a startup founder in Malaysia in the last 10, 15 years, it would have been doubly difficult compared to anywhere else. Being a startup founder is already very difficult. And part of it was, I think structurally, a lot of the ecosystem and the support that came with it in the past was geared towards the bigger ones. As a national policy, before this administration came in, the focus was to create 5 unicorns. And therefore, the ecosystem was geared towards the bigger ones. Whereas if you had gone through the mill yourself as a startup founder, you know that any ecosystem that can sustainably produce unicorns must have a very strong and wide foundations from seed and early stage. And that's what we are changing. And we understood that the government cannot continuously provide the funding for all classes, for all stages. That's why it's very important that as far as government policy is concerned, let's focus on the ecosystem. And part of the ecosystem is having more seed and early stage startup, because that would allow VCs like Max to come, and you would have more chance of hitting a good startups. And I think once you reach a scale, and with the sovereign funds coming, either through fund of funds or their own funds, and then you create the funding ecosystem that can serve all the startups from the early stage, the ones at the growth stage. Obviously the VCs focus on growth stage. The money would have been there. And then the Series A, Series B, and so on. And that's why the government decided that let's move away from preoccupation about unicorns, about the numbers. Let's focus on ecosystem. And then the more people will come from all over the world, either funders or founders or tech talents, then is that ecosystem that will allow the learning curve for Malaysian founders, because they work with people from around the world, and hopefully that will also close the gap in terms of capabilities, technical, and so on.
No, that's very interesting, because what you talked about is the ecosystem, is what is required. And I'm glad that you're not focusing on like the top 5. But because the success rate of somebody converting into unicorn is very small, this thing. So larger the pool is a better opportunity of producing the unicorn, rather than just figuring out, because nobody knows who's going to be a unicorn. So that's a very right approach. And also another interesting right approach which I see is that you talk about the ecosystem, but also you have focused on the funding side a lot. Because everything follows the money. The funders will follow where the money is. Opportunities we all know is in Malaysia, in ASEAN, we all know is there. But if we focus on actually people who have the money, who are willing to fund, then automatically you will see a lot of ideas and a lot of funders will start following. And the fact that we have 3 funders here on this important panel, clearly a testament to that is the government thinking is in the right direction. So let me start with Dato' Nick on the extreme side, and then we just follow the line there. I think you have been in the public and private market, not so much on the private market, but increasingly you're becoming more comfortable to look at the private market side, especially in the domestic side. So what has changed as an investor? What is the change you are seeing that you are getting excited that this is the place I want to put my money in?
Thank you, Nitin. Assalamualaikum warahmatullahi wabarakatuh, and good afternoon, everyone. It's good to be here. Thank you for having me here. Indeed, Quop is a newly set up fund, relatively young. Yeah? We were set up in 2007. At that point of time, our exposure was mainly in the public market space, both the equity and fixed income. So what we realized that from risk-adjusted return perspective, we found that in order for us to basically get the alpha that we seek, we need to move to the private market. We see a lot of opportunities in the private market. So we started to have small exposure in the beginning. And subsequently, once we get more comfortable there, what we discovered was that from the late stage, of course, by that time, it's just basically the return is not quite there, basically. It's actually almost matching the public market space already. So we were pushing the exposure towards the earlier stage. But our exposure that we found that we could secure was mainly internationally. It was a bit easier for us to get the returns and the risks that meet our parameters. So rather than onshore, okay. So we decided at the last few years to start thinking about how do we get the funneling to happen from the early stage, because things need to move at the early stage, at the startups, in order for them to graduate and become the stage A, B, and so forth until they become public listed companies if they wish. So we started to think about how do we, get exposure to that kind of risk-adjusted return kind of investment opportunities. So I think that's when we decided last year, for example, we launched Dana Perintis exactly for that, to partner with very experienced, high-performing GPs in the VC space who can become our reach as we build our own capabilities, as we build our own reach, to help us to come and basically allow us to get exposure within not just Malaysia, but also in the region. So that is one of the main reasons why we decided to get this exposure. And of course, it must still fit. It did not change our investment policy and guidelines at all. It still meet our risk budget. So, but we need to do it in stages.
The fact that you started looking at it itself is a very good start. That send a very right message. And when I come to Khazana, I'm going to get more detail into that of the messaging part. But now let me move to my good friend Amex. So Amex, you're sitting in Singapore. K3 Ventures invest in multiple markets across the region. And now you have been looking at Malaysia, invested in some good companies at the beginning. But when you invest in different countries, Minister talk about the ecosystem. What are the pillars required from your perspective when you decide a country is ready to be invested from the startup perspective?
Nitin, thank you for the opportunity, YB. When we at K3 look at a founder or a company, we look for people, product, and market, and we try and solve for the context of timing. So timing is beyond our control, but we try to put on a lens to frame the context. And today, with KL20, we believe that the policy has been in place with a sincere and big commitment to shape talent and capital. Because with talent and capital, we will basically be able to address the market. We can attract capital and talent to start companies in Malaysia. Investors can... we believe that investors can actually invest in ASEAN through Malaysia, as they articulated earlier. And the policies of the KL20 have been so thoughtful in terms of the pillars in attracting the talent, down to the fact that when we read the paper, it solves for the spouse, for the international school, down to helping founders have a key point to have a POC with government-linked agencies and MNCs if their product is good. That will really accelerate the scaling process. And with the very, very thoughtful Dana Impact and Dana Parentis programs, you can see my fellow VC friends from overseas in the room. It has attracted a sincere amount of capital allocators who want to be here and lean in and invest in the startup ecosystem here. And with that, they bring tremendous opportunity to mentor and grow founders and also facilitate a lot of sharing. The thing about VC capital is that because it's so risky, you need an ecosystem of VC to share the risks and lean in together collectively to help the founder succeed. And I believe that today's commitment of 17 VCs and it's just a show of that. And lastly, the policy has really shaped infrastructure. Today, with the announcement of NVIDIA, with their partners YTL, they're putting the Blackwell first in Asia, will be in Malaysia. This will be the highest level of compute of GPUs at what is arguably the lowest cost of production. So if you have talent, you have capital, you have a market, and you have the cheapest cost of compute, that there's a global shortage, then there's really no excuse why we cannot see the most meaningful AI companies coming out of this Malaysian economy. So thank you.
I'll just add two comments to Amex, what you said. So just to crystallize, I was just trying to see, the ecosystem you talked about, and I want to go more lyrical over there. The fact that I'm learning how to play piano, I call TTPPCC, what you actually said. So the whole ecosystem is you require talent and technology, you require policies and partners, and you require capital and companies. And this is how the whole ecosystem, is required if, Malaysia wants to achieve its goal of KL20. And I think from the going forward, these are the, 6 elements we need to continuously look at pillars Maybe I'm missing, I'll come back to you in case if you guys have to add. But these are broader things which you talk about, which the government is already working. If not, it has to start looking at that. Okay? And also very interesting thing you talk about is the sharing of the risk among the VCs. And I also talk about, Nick talk about the messaging part, which I spoke when she said. I think considering the fact that Khazanah is one of the most influential investor in this part of the world as a sovereign, and they have been investing overseas, both in the private and the public markets. And what they do in Malaysia also send a very strong message that as a sovereign, they are actually looking at this KL20 and the opportunity here in a different light. And that will send a different message to all the stakeholders out there. So I just want to get that messaging from you, why you are excited about KL20 at this point of time.
Thanks, Nitin, and thanks for YBRFC and the rest of our committee for inviting me. What am I excited? Why is today something that's really, really instrumental, I think, for the country? And I think that's because, like YBRFC mentioned, we're actually tackling this holistically, looking at the whole ecosystem. So let me tell you, I think we launched our impact fund, Dana Impact, a couple of years back in 2022, late 2022. And one of the things that we set out to do is to see how we can actually spur the whole ecosystem, the startup ecosystem. And it was hard. Finding opportunities to invest wasn't that easy. So yes, I mean, we did the easier things to do, which is find some established GPs and put in money there and help them do that. But we found that it was very difficult to get founders, the talent. It was also very difficult for the founders to actually kickstart their startups, looking at even pre-seed funding, right? And so we brought in Antler, and recently they did something where there's 9 startups, 22 founders, and at least helped spur that. And at the same time as we were developing that, we found that talent was also quite difficult to get. So we had to look at the skills, bringing in coders, bringing in training for coders as well. And then eventually we thought, okay, these are wonderful startups, but they need access to corporates. Again, the GLCs were very, very much in the traditional stance of looking at their own services, not realizing that if they don't innovate themselves, they'll be disrupted. So what do? We basically get the GLCs to also open up and look at corporate ventures, right? And we brought in Plug and Play in order to do that. So I think one thing which is really exciting here is, we did that, we started that, but now we have a whole of nation approach dealing with this matter. I think, which MX mentioned, and YBRFC mentioned, the visas, which allow spouses to work, having facilitation to look at setting up here, whether it's VCs, whether it's individuals, that is a game changer. And that's something which really, really excites us, because not only are we seeing us seeding capital, but we're seeing a lot of venture capitalists coming in as well, the VCs, and we're creating that ecosystem. So even though we're launching today, but prior to this, we've already seen a lot of excitement. And not only that, I think another thing I would like to add, and this is why it's so timely, I'm really excited about, is the time is now. Looking at the whole world at the moment, where you see supply chains being disrupted, where you're seeing geopolitics coming to play, having a country which is actively neutral, fiercely neutral, is something which is a selling point. And having the cost infrastructure makes it even better. By the way, I just remind everyone from overseas, I'm not sure whether you know, the expat ranking of the best places to live in Forbes, Malaysia's KL is number 8, by the way. So it's a wonderful place to live. So the time is now, and I think why it's different is because we see a more holistic approach to this.
I just want to take the last part, as an outsider, Indian based in Singapore. And this is a very honest, thing which I'm actually sharing. KL as a city, despite, every city has its own challenges, but it is actually one of the best places and the most comfortable places to live. And, the fact that if government is making it easy for people to move in and be supportive of that, and I think that I completely agree as an outsider is going to be a game changer, because, when you have a family and when you're going to take risk in terms of your career, you need a place where your family is safe, but at the same time, your interest in your business is supportive. And that is exactly what Malaysia is doing as part of this KL20. And if I have to move, and I think this will be one of my top contender city to move, and I'm being very honest about that, and I really like this place. So let's move on to the whole ecosystem, and I continue with my piano lyrical TTPPCC, okay? So is there anything we are missing, first, Minister Rafizi? And secondly, as we said, that this is start of the journey, not everything is perfect. So as you sit here, what will be some of the key areas of ecosystem you're focusing on to ensure that the value proposition is completely complete? And we'll have the same thing with all the speakers to get that.
I think at different levels of focus, if you are in government ministry, you have a different preoccupation. If you are sovereign fund or pension fund, you have a different focus on the TTCCPP part of it. So if I were to share what is my biggest concern is, and I don't think this is an answer that comes out in any tech forum, is the ability of the government to change our society's success model and risk aversion. Malaysia as a country has built our economy on large-scale sectors. Plantations, oil and gas, electronics, so much so that I think for the last 50 years, we looked at employment in big industries as an affirmation of success. So you have talents in this country, and this is very unpopular because all of us, the older generation, actually went through this stage. If you're a top student and you're a good talent, chances are they would want to work at a pretty stable corporate career. And that presents a problem to the country, especially as we are pushing for a higher value type of economic activities, especially in startup and tech, where it is extremely, extremely risky. It's not sexy. In Silicon Valley, it's very cool to just wear your shorts and slippers going to office. Not yet in Malaysia, I mean, you have to have your corporate lanyard and you have to, So as I went through this, first myself personally, because that was my route for a career, in your traditional audit firms and then oil and gas and then pharmaceuticals, I realized that if you were to strike it on your own here, it's very difficult. It's difficult because it's risky, and it becomes a vicious cycle because it's precisely because it's risky, the capital wouldn't come in. The whole ecosystem does not support it. So our preoccupation that I think is the most challenging of all the pillars of the ecosystem is very quickly changing society's appetite for risk, for success, for innovation, and that cannot be done in the overall startup ecosystem. It will help as you have more founders coming, as you have more funding, and you start seeing some of these early success, that will help. But ultimately, we have to change the fiber of society, and that goes into the education system, that goes into government's focus, and that's precisely why we want to send the signal to society that governments takes risks seriously. And if you want to have a good future, and the future lies with risk-taking, and the government has to start it. And I think if we focus on that, with the plan, with the ecosystem, and with the focus of the respective players in the ecosystem, everything will slowly fall into place, and then, because everything starts with the talents. In fact, I feel talents is the beginning. The capital will eventually come for it. So that's, we have our work cut out for it. It's not just about a plan. It's not just about a preach. It's how we slowly change the fiber, especially the younger ones. And there's a lot of structural issues that we have to resolve. But I think looking at the assignment for KL20 and so on, and you know, I've been from the fraternity itself. I know there's a lot of yearning for more and more people to strike it on their own, and I think it will happen organically, but we hope that it will happen at a much faster rate, so that we can achieve that ambition of being in the top 20 by 2030.
Yeah. So we need to add a third C to the last two C's, the culture. The culture of both the government, you said, is changing. The people have to change. And I think we need to embrace and celebrate risk-taking and failure. This is something we always tell people to take risks, but we never celebrate failures. Because when you take risks, there's a chance of failure. But we always celebrate success. So one idea for next year, KL20, to basically have some of the most successful failures, where people tried and failed, but there's nothing wrong in that. So that gives confidence to people. Yes, I can try, fail, but people acknowledge that I'm ready for the next assignment. So we got one more C. So Dr. Faisal, coming to you, anything in terms of the whole ecosystem which you feel the government should be focusing on?
Like what YB Rafizi mentioned, I think each of us have a role to play in this whole ecosystem. I think for Khazanah, our role is investing, but we do have a strategic angle to that as well. So first, I think YB Rafizi rightly pointed out that as far as startups are concerned in this country, it is taking a lot of risk. But one thing that might reduce the risk is the availability and the continuity of capital from early all the way to the late stage. I think when you try to start something out, but you know that there's not enough capital in the valley of death, then how do you grow? Or how do you start this up? Because even at the seed level, it's very difficult. And I think this is our role, where while we have an investing mandate, but because it's developmental in nature, and we have a long-term gestation period in terms of returns, we can take bigger risks and bring in partners that looks at the whole ecosystem, right? And looking at investments from even venture generation up to Series A and all the way to growth as well. So that's something that we are doing, and we're actually helping, being very proactive with that. And I think with the Prime Minister announced the National Fund of Funds, or something like that, it will be supercharging that effort. Okay. The other thing is, I'd also like to take note and pick on what YB Rafizi mentioned is, Khazanah, we have a lot of investments, the large companies, but mainly in traditional businesses, mainly in services. In fact, when you want to look at this country, the companies that create stuff are mainly manufacturing owned by foreign companies. And I think this is also an opportunity where Malaysia can change its tack to be more just services, but also a country that creates stuff, that innovates and produces stuff. So again, shifting towards innovation, shifting towards manufacturing homegrown stuff is also something which we want to focus on. So again, continuity of capital, and also looking at the strategic angle of how they can actually benefit the nation long term.
You added one more C to the TPPCC, the continuity of capital. Okay, so I think C is winning a battle of ecosystem. Amex?
Thanks, Nathan. I think I'd like to just build on that. I think the continuity of capital from the Series A to Series B funding gap will create that culture of risk-taking, because when they start up a company from 0 to 1, they know there's a path and line of sight to the milestones that they have to hit in order to graduate and continue to expand overseas, for example. So that's another thoughtful initiative of KL20 today. And I also would try to debunk the myth of the market, because people say that Malaysia may not be the biggest market in ASEAN, but if we look at our portfolio and we talk to some of our portfolio companies, like our partnerships with the Grab Digibank, Caro, or today Wiz AI, these three founders tell us that the most promising unit economics and most of the resources are being focused on the Malaysian market and not our larger neighbor across. So that shows you that actually not only is it an interesting market where the timing and the neutrality of Malaysia already creates this opportunity, but I think that if we solve the capital problem, then we will create this culture of risk-taking to provide big outcomes for people who leave their banking or consulting jobs to start up, to take risks. And lastly, the risk of failure. In our portfolio, the founders of ByteDance, Meituan, they all have failed before. Second time, third time founders. With AI in the room today, second time founders. So if we can create a culture that doesn't punish failures, because product, people, market, and timing, they could get all three right, but the timing wrong. And if we impose on the capital allocators to actually be not forgiving, but objective about the talent and the business model, then perhaps we could actually be thoughtful in the way that the capital allocators rally behind people who are talented and willing to take risks, but perhaps they were on the wrong side of the stick when it came to the timing. Yeah, so thank you.
Thank you, Amex. Dr. Nick?
One wish list that I have is actually, I have two actually, but the first one is on R&D. I think Malaysian corporates do not spend enough on R&D. And if they do spend, it's mainly on the exploitation of the current processes, meaning improvement of what they are currently doing, rather than exploration kind of R&D. And I would strongly, I think I'm very excited about KL20. I think bringing in the capital here and bringing the expertise, the subject matter domain experts here will provide that kind of comfort, right, for perhaps companies to also take that extra step, because you can allocate your R&D. I think for example, the listed companies, tech companies, they spend maybe 10%. That's a sizable amount, but it's mainly on business improvements rather than doing something a bit out of ordinary. So I do strongly encourage the corporates as well to basically take, go up to the balcony, basically look at the industry and see which areas that you can explore that perhaps can bring you to the next level. And I think for us to do that, we need to have innovation lab. So Quop currently is actually creating our InnoLab internally to exactly do that, to exactly test ideas, to exactly put in that kind of pilot projects for us to do new things. So we're quite excited about that. And we're going to focus on 6 basically pillars. And of course, amongst them will be the fintech side, the education tech, the silver economy, of course, that is very close to our heart. And of course, digital economy as well amongst them. And the second part is because these startups are new to be built, right? So it does not have all the legacy issues that are currently being faced by the existing companies, i.e. the legacy issues such as which require transitioning, which requires a lot of spending for them to transition. So all these startups must start with the green idea in mind already. It must be built on sustainability agenda. It must be built that meets the expectation, the ESG expectation of the capital providers. So those will be the 2 wish lists that I would have. Thank you.
So we have like 3 to 4 minutes left. So I get Amex 1 minute to you, Dr. Faisal 1 minute, and then I'll come to the final question to you so that we keep on time. So she talked about research as one place Malaysia should focus on. Amex, from your perspective, what are the new areas Malaysia should focus on in terms of the sector? Because everywhere in the region, I say they want to be a fintech hub. Okay, but there's life in technology beyond fintech. Okay, so if you have to pick up one sector which Malaysia should double down in terms of emerging as a hub, what will that be? Dr. Faisal, I'll come back to you with the same thing.
I think we're just to reiterate, we're super excited about the GPU compute program that YB Rafizi announced today. He's actually taken the advantages of Malaysia, renewable energy, excess power, stable policy and government, and a lot of infrastructure of IDC available. And he's actually created a program to make compute available for startups to use, to build their own foundational models, to do inferencing. This will impact the way traditional businesses operate as well. If we think of how many traditional businesses are using Microsoft Copilot today, why aren't there more alternatives to that, for example? So, sorry, I know Microsoft's in the room, but yes, we're excited about AI and what Malaysia can do to leapfrog and really have a thought leadership in the region for AI. Thank you.
R&D, AI, Dr. Faisal.
Very quickly, something that the country is naturally strong at. One relates to the E&E space and medical devices. I mean, that's something that we're already doing, and we want to boost that further. But another thing that I think we should look at, where as a country we're naturally blessed with, is in the area of agri-tech, as well as sustainability as well. And that's because we need it, and that's something that we can actually lead and champion as a country.
That's good. So I think, the realization what the strengths are. So with you, the final, question, how does the success looks like? So, when few years down the line, as we keep moving in the direction of KL20 journey, for you, what are the key milestones you'll be looking at to measure how well we are progressing on this?
I keep switching it off. Some of the key results area have been mapped out clearly internally. Of course, you have to measure the metrics, the quantity of startups coming in, the deal making, the term sheets, the investments. That's given. But further down the line, I think I do want to see early success stories. And when I say early success stories, it's not necessarily just Malaysian grown startup making it big, either surpassing Series C, going to more than $1 billion, $2 billion valuation. But I want to see a confluence of tech talents from around the world here. So I do want to see more Indians, more Singaporeans, more Taiwanese, more Estonians, more Germans, more Europeans coming here. Because that addresses the sustainability part. And I think then that becomes quite a key success measurement that perhaps we don't normally talk about when we talk about startups. So that's something that we'll be monitoring. The other bit is the pipeline of companies ready to go for listing locally, either at ACE market or LIP market or even the main market. Because for many years, that has been our problem as an economy. We have very limited pool of companies to go for listing. And that's because most of our major corporations are in traditional sectors. If we compare our Bursa market with some others, I think our tech weightage is very low. I think 4 to 5% alone, only. And what a pity, because this is a country that is recognized globally as one of the most important semiconductor players in the world. I think the anecdotes back then during COVID is that people cannot produce cars elsewhere because Malaysia is closed for business, because a lot of the chips that are used in automotive is actually from Malaysia. And the fact that despite having such a strong E&E, a global exporter, our tech weightage in our local market is only 4%. We certainly missed out the last few months, bull run in the tech market. So that's also one indicator that we would like to see, that we have more and more pipelines of tech and startups ready for listing. Because if all this happens, then we would be able to create a sustainable pivot to the high-value economy, where government focuses more on the regulation, more on the ecosystem, less on funding, less on direct intervention. Because those are the prerequisites. And I think we can do it. If there is one thing that I've realized sitting down with so-called tech celebrities and the other industry, we were doing the same thing when we were rolling out the ambitious plan for energy transition. There were a few things that had worked before in our favor as Malaysians. Number one, we can be really humble. And humility goes a long way, especially when you already have a good foundation. Number two, we have good talents, whether we like it or not. We may not see it, but people from around the world recognize that Malaysia has a good foundation in terms of talents, in terms of education, and so on. Thirdly, we have always been blessed with inherent advantages. Previously, we had a lot of natural resources. Now, our geographical location and the neutrality that comes with it, given the backdrop of geopolitical shifts around the world, suddenly it becomes our strong inherent advantages. And if we do this together, and I've switched from doing pitching for my startup to pitching for the country in the last 1 year, I do notice that people readily open up to us. It's not that difficult to sell Malaysia as a place, provided that we have a plan, we have the humility, we work for it, and we give the commitment and early success. And 2-3 years down the line, I think if we are able to make KL20 works, and the rest, I think, will sort out by itself. And that's my wish, hopefully, for the country.
Very well said. So let me summarize the conversation we had for last 40 minutes. I think why Malaysia is open for the business, and I'll give you 2 reasons from the summarization here. One is the recognition from the government. What are its strengths? There's an acceptance of what is the strengths and the areas they need to actually work on. So there's an honesty over there. So that's the one reason when there is honesty from the government, that's a reason for us to be excited about. And the second reason is that whether the investors believe in that honesty. And listening to the 3 investors, I get the sense that they believe in the honesty that the time has come for Malaysia to take the next leap. And these 2 reasons give me the confidence. Yes, KL20 is a reality. It's not that when, if it is going to happen. The question is by when it is going to happen. The goal is to accelerate the process of achieving the target. But the journey has started, I think, moving in the right direction. And hopefully when we come back next year, having this discussion, we would have seen much more progress being made on my lyrical TTPP CCCC. Okay, and we'll see how far we actually go on that. But it was a very insightful discussion. I'm very excited. I hope everybody in the audience is also excited that the time for Malaysia has come. Now is the time to start writing the checks. Okay, so are we ready? Okay, thank you all. Thank you.
Thank you, Nitin, for moderating that conversation, and thank you to our very first panel here at the KL20 Summit 2024. Let's wrap things up with a quick photograph to commemorate our first panel. Everybody can be kindly pose for the cameras in front. From Malaysia to the world, we're open for tech business. Looking forward to those checks. Thank you very much, everyone, for being a part of this conversation. And we move forward.